fun. So when you're talking about like a package of bees, those are usually 3 pounds of bees. So that ends up being about 30,000 bees that you get, you know. So yeah, in the summertime, the turnover is very, very high for the workers, the maidens. So yeah, there's definitely that question with apitherapy of, ethics around it. And it is kind of like a chicken before the egg question, because we can also have that conversation about the plant world. And most often people are not as concerned about the spirit of the plant or the health of the plant or even the plant community for their medicine. And so it's a good question for us to sit with before we take in any natural medicine, which is something that I'm very grateful for in my herbalism training, that really instilled in me the value of developing a deep relationship with plants before you work with them, having like taking the time to really build that relationship. And the same thing goes for the bees. And when people reach out to me for apitherapy, I really encourage them to, take classes, take beekeeping classes, and then eventually, as we were talking before about folks who are stinging for Lyme, if you have this chronic illness that you're hoping to do something long-term with apitherapy, like you should be stewarding hives and you should be giving back to pollinators and, full circle. So I apologize if there's like a humming in the background. It's our air conditioning. I'm in the basement office, so I'm sorry if it's loud. But yeah, I'm really glad that you found relief, and it's just another testimony to the miraculous healing that the bees have for us. Okay, so we are over halfway through our journey together. I'm feeling tender. My heart is feeling tender about it. I'm feeling a little, as I was looking at the calendar, just quantifying how many sessions we have together. There's only 1, 2, 3, 4 plus graduation. So 5 sessions together. I can't believe it's July 1st. I'm feeling, wow. I think I said this last time. I still feel like I'm in the vortex of summer. Like time has just kind of stretched and compressed. So I'm just trying to be present in the every moment, everyday moment. But because we are about halfway through, or over halfway through, I wanted to pause here to offer some time for reflection. First, I wanted to ask if there was any feedback or reflections or anything that stirred you from the summer solstice video. And then I have a prompt for us to take a few moments to write about afterwards. Do either of you have anything to comment about the summer solstice? You can also, I would love to hear about your summer solstice, and if there's any bee related stories woven into that, of course.
So confession, I didn't watch the video yet. And I was
no worries.
Hoping it was going to happen this week, but didn't. I would say like I had quite a solstice experience this year. And what I found really neat is just like, because I traveled for the first time internationally in 4 years, and I just realized like how much like honey and the bees were like in my in my, I guess, like auric like awareness. So like where we stayed, like I seemed to like find like like there was like pots of like fresh honey like in different places, like by they had like a beautiful tea and coffee station, and then on the buffet they had like the end. I was like super like curious like where the honey come from, and just I was eating honey like the whole time. And that's something that was just like, yeah, really I guess new for me. Like I love honey, but I wouldn't have probably even thought to eat it, but there I was very like it was just with me the whole time. And maybe because my bees had just arrived before I left, so I felt more connected to them, and I was writing home to see how they were doing, and they were doing really well. So that would be my I guess other than getting into my personal stuff with the solstice, that would be like my bee connection.
Love your lashes, by the way. They're like, yeah.
Um, thank you. I'm super into them. Like I did them for the trip, and I'm like, these might have to
Yes.
stay. So I'm really in love with them.
When you say the video, are you talking about the summer solstice
Yes.
class recording? Or are you okay?
Mhm.
I didn't know if yeah. So yeah, a lot has happened since the summer. So, you know, here, and I'm sure you remember too from your time in Southern California, but we have that like May gray, June gloom. And then towards the end of June, around the solstice, it switches. And it was truly like a light switch this summer where the solstice hit, and then boom, it was summer and everything changed. A lot of the plants started to die back, which is what happens. You know, it's like a very different season here in the summer. And with the hive, there was just like a rapid shift in energy is like the best way that I could describe it. Like in the spring, we'd go out and they seemed really calm and kind of like in almost like a trance like energy. And then in the summer, it's just they're like busy. They've got shit to do. They're going to do it. They don't have any time for like me or my like shenanigans. They're just like, they seem like they've just got eye on the prize. And I had kind of like a accident happen when I was doing an inspection, which is in one of the hives, we were taking the feeder out because they don't need it anymore. And they had kind of built in, and I didn't see it, but they had kind of built some comb like up against the feeder. And so when I pulled it out, it ended up ripping a little bit. So we got to taste honey for the first time from our hive, and that was really exciting. And after your lecture too, I experimented with different plants to use in the smoker just to see how they responded and what they seemed to like the best. And we have eucalyptus that grows here, we have pine that grows here, and we have white sage that grows abundantly here. And played around with that, also played around with just like leftover hay from our goats, and we've got a really good combo. But it seemed that their energy was a lot different with the sage, and I am really trying to not be biased there either, or like placebo in my own respect, but they did seem very different. Like the note of their hum seemed lower than with pine and eucalyptus and just like other stuff that we stuff it with. Has that been your experience too? Okay. It was like a totally different sound coming from them. So that was summer solstice for us. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. When you say it was lower, did you mean like they were more chill?
Not no, not necessarily. Like they still like the it seemed like the pattern in which they were flying and like how much, you know, all that seemed different, but or sorry, the same, but the like when I go sit by the hive and I'm just listening and I'm not doing anything, I'm just observing, there's kind of like a you know, and then when we do inspections, it's kind of like a you know, there's like a kind of like a higher pitch to it. But with the sage, it stayed at that lower like resonance or lower note. I don't know what you would call it. Like my husband would know like what note it is, but I don't. But yeah, it just seemed like it stayed at like a lower pitch note. I don't know what it would be called. Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely my experience with white sage as well. And at our last property, it was growing abundantly. And I also had a lot that I had cultivated. I think it's my absolute favorite plant to use with the bees for that reason. Just time and time again, it is noticeably different, their response to that plant. It's like deeply ancient. It's really beautiful. And I think that, you know, it's interesting, the pine and the eucalyptus, those are all highly resinous. White sage does have like a little bit of resin to the leaves, but we see how pine, eucalyptus, some of the other like manzanita, those can be like deep, like highly resinous. And one of my observations was wondering if like the smoke, if it was warmer because of the resins that were present, or if the fume was a little bit more volatile because the oils and compounds within the resins. So yeah, those were some of my observations as well.
I have a question about the actual smoking, like what? So I feel like I either heard or read or you mentioned at some point something came across, and I was like a little bit curious because I was like one part stuck and the other part I was like, wait a second, but wouldn't that mean? So the question was, so when they smell the smoke, what I understood from whatever I read or whatever was that it was making them think that there was a potential of a forest fire coming or a fire. So it made them actually like, so this is in my mind, I was like, well, then wouldn't that make them want to be more like fight or flight? But it was something like they then needed to fill their bellies with honey, which made them less likely to sting. Anyway, so that's I feel like I heard something or read something and I have like only a partial understanding.
Yes.
So
there's a few theories about the smoke. So the first one is, yes, that the smell of smoke reminds them of forest fires, which is like an ancient memory, right? And that probably initiates a pheromone release within the hive, saying that we could be in danger, we could be losing our tree, our home. So we need to eat as much honey as possible because we may have to leave. And if we have to leave, we're not going to have any food and we're not going to have a home until we find another, cavity or whatever to nest in. So when they eat all of that honey, it's thought that they are going to be much more just like moving slower. Like, after you've had a big meal, it's the same kind of concept. So they're not going to be as frenetic, like trying to figure out why, or if there's someone coming into the hive. So that's like one theory. The other theory is, again, like if it's like more related to like a bear response, because bears have also been I would say maybe their main predator in the forest, where bears come in and eat the hive, eat the comb, eat the honey, eat everything. So there's also like someone coming into the hive has that, like, again, initiates maybe that ancient memory of someone coming in to eat. And so the smoke just happens to be like associated with that. The other more recent theory is that the smoke will mask the pheromone release. So they're unable to communicate with each other through pheromone. So then they're not able to create like a unified response to attack or move towards whatever is coming into the hive. I would say that for me, it's probably like the latter, because I've worked on hives for a long time, and when I open the hive, I'm not and using a little bit of smoke, I'm not seeing this mad rush to eat honey. Like I've never really witnessed that. I have witnessed though when a hive may be agitated and I'm like initially opening them and they're agitated. That could be because of the weather, or they're just not feeling like that was the right time, or it was a hive that was like legitimately aggressive. When I use smoke, it definitely like stops that response of the communication to each other, like someone's here or something is here, something's trying to get into the hive. So those are the theories. And in the commercial world, since we're on this topic and Joel asked about this, anyway, I'll just dive into this little tidbit right here. But in the commercial world, you'll find people using newspaper or burlap or cotton. Since we are mostly green witches here, I tend to lean towards the plant world, of course. So here's some options for you. Herbs, dried herbs, white sage, black sage, rosemary, lavender, rose, mint, basil. Of course, with white sage, we have to be ultra careful. This should be only something that you've cultivated yourself. Or if you're stewarding land, like wild harvesting with the right amounts that you're harvesting. Like we never take more than a third of a plant and a third of the total population in a space. White sage is also an indigenous medicine and ceremony tool, so we have to be really careful. And quite frankly, all the plants have been used by some culture in ceremony, most likely, or for many years. So we just have to be careful when we're using the plant kingdom as our guides and allies and medicine. We have to really be, in my opinion, this is what I preach. We really should be spending a lot of effort into the right sourcing, into cultivating our own, supporting other local growers with the right intentions in mind. What I have found, rosemary works amazing as well because it's a little woody, and that ends up being a longer fuel for the smoker. And lavender is good too, has a little bit more resin, so you'll find that it could be a little bit more perfumey. But either way, those are all great options. From the tree families, we have pine needles, eucalyptus, cedar, leaves, and mulch. So essentially, like when you're starting your smoker, you're making a little campfire. With your campfire, you have little bits of starter fuel. That could be like little twigs and little pieces of paper, or I don't know, like just starting a fire essentially. You do that in your smoker. You light it first. You give it a puff, a handful of times so that the flame is going. And then you're slowly adding things that are going to burn longer. So for example, pine needles are, oh, cool. Thank you. You've been adding goat berries. That's awesome.
It started accidentally, but then we noticed it like worked better.
That's awesome. Goat poop. So pine needles would be something that would be like your initial starter fuel because it burns really fast. And then you would probably add some bigger pieces of mulch, or you have some cedar, some of those rosemary, that'll burn longer. And then you don't want your fire like raging in the smoker. You kind of let it get really hot with the flame, and then you snuff it by closing it. Then you're still pumping it so that the heat and fire is still activated, but you're not actively like shooting flames out. It should look like a cool smoke, kind of like this photo here. The smoke is when it's cool and white like that. That's the right way. It shouldn't be flames. It shouldn't be like black So that's how you do it. You can also use burlap, coffee bean bags. Like if sometimes coffee roasters will give you the bags from coffee, cotton, brown paper bags that are recycled, no ink. The ink can be really nasty, off-gassing for the bees. You can also make a little candle. I learned this from one of my mentors. If you have bits of old beeswax from your hive, you can kind of shape it into a log and then wrap paper or burlap around it and then light it and then stick it into the smoker and it will burn down like a little candle. So that works really well too.
So when you say leaves for the tree, you mean like leaves of any tree? Any kind of leaf? It'd be okay?
I use oak here because I have mostly oak trees. So that's what I use. And that's usually like a initial like fuel to get the fire going. It doesn't burn very long. What else do I have around here? There's hickory and I have black walnut too. So those leaves work great. Yeah.
Maple would be fine. We have like
Maple.
maple.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. Okay.
Just experiment with it. You
Yeah.
know, don't wait until you're going to do an inspection to like figure out your smoker. And also like one thing that you'll learn as you're becoming more adept to doing the inspections, you're going to have to pump your smoker like throughout the inspection process. If you don't pump it, your fire will go out because it's not receiving oxygen to keep the flame going. So there's that. Cool. So yeah, I'm gonna try the goat droppings because clearly I have a lot of that. Joel, was there something you wanted to share, like on a personal note about your summer solstice? I didn't want to cut you off. If you wanted to share, that's great. If not, you don't have to.
It's not really something I feel like I need to share. It was
Okay.
just I found it to this particular solstice with like stuff that I've been doing, and the soul reclamation stuff was very powerful, but it doesn't like it's not like a connection to the bee world so much. But yeah, so thank you for asking.
Yes. So I wanted to take a moment for you guys, for you ladies, to have a few moments quietly to just reflect on not necessarily like the course so far, but mostly what has been resonating with you in terms of connecting with the bees. It could also be a larger, expansive question, like connecting to the natural world with the bees as one of your guides. I would love to hear some of the things that have stood out to you or themes that have come up for you over and over again. If there has been any kind of reoccurring dream or pattern of interactions with the bees. For example, when I first started working with them every day, when I was not near one of the hives I was managing, every single day I would find a bee on me. So there was like this very specific pattern that was happening. And then another season, I had very specific dreams that were happening over and over again. When I was pregnant with Ilios, I was sitting with the bees a lot and, in a meditative space. And I was getting a lot of the same from downloads from them. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes and maybe just drop in if you're able to close your eyes and just kind of think about some of these prompts. It can come out however it needs to. I just want to offer this space for us to share that and reflect on the journey so far together. So let's come back at 47. Okay. If you're ready to come back, I invite you to join me again. Would anyone like to go first, or I'm happy to? Okay, I'll go. So this was a good moment for me to reflect again on things that I have been feeling this year. And this specifically is themes in my life that have been coming up again, that the bees have been communicating to me in their own ways on how to maybe move forward and kind of address some of those things. So something that just really came through to me is the presence is the medicine. I have found that in my daily life, like it can be extremely hectic, and I have a lot of responsibilities on me. There's a lot of needs for the farm, for my children, for my relationship, for finances. And lately I have been in a space of just kind of going through the motions and meeting checkpoints, but not really meeting the needs of the heart and the spirit and the soul of myself and possibly my family. This has manifested in different ways. And also something that the bees have showed me was when I was in Southern California, my management style, that word, with the hives was very hands off. It was very, I would check in on them maybe once or twice a month, like opening them up but often sitting with them. But it seems like the hives here require and have responded to a more frequent check-in on a like emotional space, not just like me going and looking at the hives. And for me, this resonates because one clear example is like my 4-year-old almost to be is really, really challenging when I am not obviously checking in with my spirit, with my heart, and like with my full presence. And on these days where I'm just going through the day, there is a lot of challenges that come back at me. The lesson that I'm learning from the bees is also like my presence and my heart and my energy is really all that is needed. I don't have to be in the hive. I don't have to be like manipulating anything. I don't have to be managing anything. And it's the same thing like with my children, with the animals. If I'm like dropped in and present, like with my heart, with my spirit, like that is the medicine and that is the connection that everyone is seeking from me, and also for myself, with myself. There's also something that I've been trying to push with the bees is, as we are a new farm again, this is our 3rd year, but still new. Again, when I was in California, I was able to sell honey and, make a lot of medicine with honey. And I really wanted to get back to that here. And I keep asking the bees, like, let's do, I'm telling them, I guess, and, I really want to move into a space of honey production. And I keep getting like a hard no. And I finally realized why recently in the last month or so. First of all, the hard no is because I'm really looking at it from a financial perspective. as like a great source of revenue for the farm, but also in response to people pressuring me for honey, like at the farmer's market or from my community. And I'm reminded, even though in my conscious self knows like honey is so sacred, and I really believe that deep down in my heart. And I'm totally affirmed now that me selling honey at the farmer's market is not what's supposed to happen because it is too sacred, and there are plenty of other beekeepers in this world who can provide that need. But my work, that has been again shown to me this year, is to be the presence that is needed, the presence that is the medicine. Meaning I am just like the facilitator of the experience. I'm the facilitator of the message of the bees. I bring people in and share with them like what my humble experiences have been, but then allow the bees to like do their work within each person's life. And the visions that I'm having for the future are so radically different than me having like an apiary to produce honey. It is now like a healing center with the bees as giving the medicine that they can by their presence. And so I'm feeling like extremely excited for this vision. And it like really makes more sense than trying to do this honey business. And it wasn't just also honey, it was like really wanting to make electuaries, which are plant medicine mixed with honey, and really wanting to put that out into the world. And maybe that will still come, but it is not like I'm affirmed. I'm not supposed to be doing that. So the presence is the medicine, and like we don't have to have elaborate structures, elaborate things in place for people to receive the medicine and the healing that they can provide. And this class has been another affirmation of that. Like all we needed were computers for us to be able to communicate with each other and share and learn in the magic of bees. So I thank you so much for listening to my my reflection and for being part of the vision. Thank you. Anyone else want to say anything?
I'll share that I resonate with so much of what you shared in so many ways. And what I'd add for my personal experiences is this so far in this apprenticeship, this mentorship, it's been sorry, he's like having a tea party right now with ceramic dishes and it's really loud. Kind of feel like my bee world got blown open in like the best way possible, and that if I just like think about my relationship with bees from childhood to now, it couldn't be more different. I was terrified of bees because of like one horror story my mom told me when she got stung by a wasp like 26 times when she was little. So I lived my entire childhood, teenage years, early adulthood, just really scared of them. Knowing consciously that they were incredible beings and that they were, good for the environment and kind of like all the basic things that one would know just being part of, humanity, or you would hope that people would know. But it wasn't until about 4 or 5 years ago that shifted for me. And then ever since then, they've just been getting kind of more and more immersed and occupying more and more of my, like, all of the thoughts that go through my head throughout a day. And yeah, this year has just been, I can't believe that we're halfway through. It doesn't feel like that at all. I feel like we're just like a few months in, but yeah, so much has changed physically, mentally, emotionally with my relationship with them, and I'm still learning so much. I don't have any food. But yeah, that's what I'll share. But yeah, the biggest things that are coming through for me right now, that are interesting and I'd like to kind of know more about is I'm having all of these really big surges of requests for getting children involved with bees. And I just think that's interesting, especially given my story of like how afraid I was, inappropriately afraid I was. And just, yeah, there's like, I've been getting lots of questions from people being like, would you ever consider doing like a kids camp for bees? I'm like, oh, interesting. That would be awesome. I'm not experienced enough to run something like that, but what a cool idea, you know, like a little day camp for kids that come and like do inspections and learn how to do that stuff. Like amazing. As a child, I would have loved that. And then also probably not lived like, I don't know, almost 20 to 30 years being afraid of bees. So anyway, yeah, it's just been a really magical year, and catching the swarm was like one of the highlights of my life, and just things like that, just really wonderful experiences. And when I learn something new that I want to know more about, I voraciously consume information, and I find that's happening now too. I'm just like, I want to know more. The scientific inquiry is strong. So thank you for putting this program together. I'm learning more than I ever thought that I would. And it's been the best. So thank you.
Thank you. We're going to do the kids camp next year now.
Not such a good idea. I was like, holy shit. I mean, I think part of it is that my eldest son goes to a Waldorf school, and when we were at like the summer like end of school party or whatever, I was talking about bees, of course. It's like all I talk about now. And one of the other moms was like, you should bring, she's like, have you ever seen those observation hives? And I was like, yeah, I have seen them. She's like, you should bring them to the school and do like classes for the kids. I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. That's so awesome. And then I was telling her, because we do workshops and stuff here, she's like, you should do like a kids camp. And I was like, brilliant. But like, I don't think I don't know, maybe. But yeah, the invitation was placed there. But yeah, wouldn't that be like, I don't know, if I wasn't if I didn't have hives and didn't have my kids involved, like I would totally sign them up for like a bee camp. I mean, that is just so cool. And then if they, yeah, could like make little medicine, I don't know. There's just like so much potential for healing and education and wonderful experiences for children. So yeah, run a kids camp.
Yeah, so I just find how the synchronicity of these things, like, first of all, I think I'll start with just like recognizing, yeah, Anna Maria, like this experience and this like initiation into bee guardianship has been like, and sometimes when things are just good and amazing and you're just like, yeah, this is just natural, it just feels like, of course this is the way it is. But when you like check yourself for a second and think like, had I signed up for like a bee course like at the local, like down, like I think, whoa, like, you know what, actually this has been like one of the hugest gifts to walk down this path with you as like the leader, or the connector, the one, you know, that's like brought the bees and allowed their medicine come through so beautifully. So thank you. I was really moved by your share and what you're feeling, and I feel like this connection between all of us, and even the girls that are online with us right now, like I know like Victoria is like so like lit up by what she's learning from you, and and she made this little video with her daughter when the bees first came, and I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like her mom's like, her daughter said to her, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, mom, how happy are you? And she's like, 10,000 million. Like, it was just like, she just couldn't contain her like overflow of joy. And then the connection that we're having right now, which is just super, like, the synchronicity is just so incredible, because yesterday a new friend that I've met this last few months, I met her in the water, and we just like bonded, and then we went for a hike. And the first time we went for a hike, I started talking about bees, and she was like, oh my gosh, I've been thinking about bees. And she didn't say anything about her sons at that point, but we had her two sons and my two sons met yesterday for the first time. And I said to her, it was like pouring rain. And I said to her, do you want to go out and see the bees? Because we've been having these conversations about bees. She said, yeah. And she said, oh, and can Hugo come? Because he is like in love with bees. And I was like, yeah, of course. So she calls her. And so then all the boys came up, but she was telling me on our walk up to the apiary, she said, yeah, he went to the wildlife refuge, and you know, there's all these incredible animals at these wildlife refuges. Like, there's like these cats and like bears and all these things. And she said all he came home talking about was the bees. He's like, mom, and apparently he's not a very emotional child. Like, he doesn't speak about his emotions much, but he said, mom, I saw the bees and I almost cried. And she was like, oh, that's really good, Hugo, that you felt anyway. And so she's telling me this, he doesn't even know that we're talking about this. We get up to the bees, and he was just like right up to them, and he's like, can I touch them? Like, he was like right at the like mouth of the hive. I'm like, well, you can. Like, so he was petting them, and like, I was like, this is incredible. And like, so, and then as a tiny drop story, like, it's sort of it's one of those weird things in my life where like I don't feel like I've like missed the boat, because I feel like everything's been coming to fruition in perfect timing, if that makes sense. But like a decade and a half ago, the families out in this area were like, multiple families were coming to ask me. I think I was just in my BED program. Like, I barely had started my career as an educator of young children. And they were asking me like, Jewel, can you start like a school? Like, I actually started looking into the Montessori's, and then figured out like, if you do the training, you can only do, it's like chunked into certain age groups. So I was like, well, if I start with them with this age, then what? Like, and not only that, I was at the time running a business with like 4 other girlfriends, a surf school. And I was like, holy moly, like, but business running in and of itself is super challenging. And I'd started doing like, you know, practicums in schools, seeing how irate parents could be. And I was like, I don't think it's a good idea to have my best friend's kids completely under my, like, it was just, the whole thing intimidated me. But I was like shocked at how many people were asking. Like, I mean, it was one of those weird things where it's like, what is the universe telling me? Like, does everybody else get asked this question on a regular basis? Like, can you start an independent school? And so to fast forward, I'll try to like not blether, but about a year ago or so, me and my oldest son were like chatting, and I was like, you know what, instead of doing like a full-blown school, like, what about doing like a summer camp? Like, you know, that kids could come, maybe even just a day camp. Maybe one night we would have a sleepover in tents and something on our land, because we've got like a lot of land. And so him and I started to get really excited about planning like this potential summer camp. And then, yeah, again, just yesterday it got brought up, because she said, you know, it'd be so cool if you could do something where then the kids could come to your camp and then come see the bees. And I was like, so then we just had this conversation. I was just like, what is happening? Like, it's just, the synchronicity is unbelievable. So I do feel, because I'm going back into the classroom this next year. I'm getting my own class, which I haven't done in 8 years, because I got so hairpinned into early literacy intervention, which was amazing. And I loved it. And it was so needed. And I was working at high priority schools, and I got so burnt out, which I didn't even realize was happening, but that's what happened. But now I feel like, okay, I'm going to have my own classroom, and I'm going to have all the security of a job and all the rest of it. And my whole like soul's work thing has become so, it went from a trickle to a river. Like, there's nothing now that's good. It's like water, nothing stops water. Like, it's just going to become more and more strong and clear. And I'm like now so much more aware of how I'm actually directing it. Like, and so, yeah, I see something like that in the future, because I know like yeah, I know I'm here to work with this, it's like this shift that's happening and with the children as we go through. On that note too, I'm also really excited because I can come to the US. And so I was really excited to tell you, Anna Maria, that I hope, like, as long as I can like get the, like, I don't think it's going to be a lot of money to buy a ticket from Toronto to Missouri, but is it Missouri? No, I'm hoping that I can come for the end of, like, I'm
Oh
like,
my gosh.
because I was like, now as soon as like the states opened up, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can actually fly there, and it's probably what, $500 or something. So I haven't looked into the flights or anything, but my intention is to come because I really want to be in your space, and it's been on my mind now for like weeks. Like it just keeps coming back. Like I'm going to be there for this close. Like I'm going to be there, which is something like I'm not someone that like hops on a plane to like go visit ever. Like it's not normal for me pre-COVID even. So, but I'm like, you know what? Now I am like, I'm like the bees. Okay. And then I know I've talked a lot, but I wanted to read what I wrote. It's only a page and a half because it's actually what came from the bees. And I think that's partly also what's opened up my ability to feel like I can like globetrot. It's like there was this. So anyway, I'll read it. First night I dreamt I could see the trails of the bees, like white trails of energy weaving across the land, or across our land. But it was a projection, like a dream from the hive, as it had been pouring the whole day, and they had not yet taken a single journey. But in my dream, they were dreaming and shockingly accurate at how they felt the land before ever physically seeing it, sensing it through hum and mapping out their paths like the musical notes of a symphony before a single note is even played. But energetically, they were already very present, their energetic chord vibration spreading slowly like honey, a golden, omnipresent vibration harmonizing with the hum of the land. We probably could have.
Let me just, yeah, you're just like spouting like sonnets and love letters to the great mystery of the bees just in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for creating that time to actually sit down and write.
Yeah.
I haven't done that since they came. And it was like, whoa, like I had the experience, but then to write it, to be like, okay, and it's rough, but now I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep journaling. So thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm like so excited about so many things. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for the affirmations of my work. It really means the world to me. All of you mean the world to me. So without further ado, we should get on to some of the curriculum. I mean, we can or we can't, whatever. I will say that the rest of this this journey together next month, we only have one session this month of July. So next month, we're going to talk about honey and flowers, which I'm so excited about. I'll show you how to extract honey. We'll talk about honey rituals and making medicine with honey. And then we'll also talk about making medicine with flowers. And September, we have a conversation around preparing the bees for the end of the year and moving into winter. And then we have our fall equinox gathering. And then October is technically our last time together. I will say that my husband and I decided that we will be hosting the PDC, the Permaculture Design Certification, the last week of September. So I will present the dates to all of you because there's an opportunity for us to overlap with the other folks being here. We're also hosting a fall equinox farm dinner that will be tickets sold to the public, and anyone who happens to be on site could attend that as well. So I'll share those dates with you, and we either meet then or meet in October. We can decide. Okay. One other thing that I have to say before the curriculum. So there is a final project for graduation, and it is not something that you need to stress out about, but it is a presentation of something that is inspired by the bees. So for example, in the past, my students have made a mead, another student made a perfume, another student experimented with baking with honey, replacing, sugar with honey, and also focusing on like honey specific desserts. Another student made June, which is kombucha with honey instead of sugar. So that was a lot of culinary, but then there was also a lot of art that has been made, music, writings. Another student actually built a hive. So the sky is the limit. Whatever resonates with you is the medicine that needs to come through. So we will present that the last class in October. And you have July, August, September now to do it. So, it can be really fun to take it seriously and like immerse yourself in something with this project. I'm trying to think of other examples of another student created, here's something cool. Another student approached a landowner who had solar, it was like a big solar farm, to put beehives there, and created this like whole partnership that could be modeled in the future for spaces with solar farms to put beehives, because it's usually like meadow. There's a lot of forage and vacant land. So anyway, that's just like another example. So whatever is inspiring for you, that is related to, that comes from the medicine of the bees, please share with us in October. And I will post details of that in the class in case you don't write it down right now.
So
yeah.
I know we need to keep going, but I just find it very funny that I've been making kombucha for years, probably like more seriously for the last like 2 years, and selling it locally, like just through, like not at a place, but just through like my social media. And I've always used honey, like from the get-go. Never knew it was called June, just looked it up, and I'm like, it's so funny. It's called the champagne of kombucha, which is so funny because I've decided I'm a champagne girl, which I don't really drink alcohol that much anymore, but I've decided if I do, it's going to either be mead, which I'm already know I'm making. I've even written a song about it, or it will be champagne. So it's just so funny to like learn that. So again, thank you. Like,
You're
crazy.
welcome.
Yeah,
You're
June.
intuitive creatrix. Okay. For you, Marlena, I don't know if you know Golden Coast Mead. That's a dear friend of mine who owns an amazing meadery close to you in Oceanside, and you should
Cool.
buy all of his mead. He also has a tasting room. You can find it in a lot of stores, or you can just cruise up to Oceanside and purchase.
Yeah, we're up in Oceanside a lot, actually. I will check it out.
Great.
Yeah, thanks for the tip.
Oh yeah. And if you go in there, you can ask for Frank and tell him that you're one of my students, and he will hook you up. He's also a bee guardian, and he is operating on the astral almost all the time.
Oh, I love Frank.
Yes.
Awesome.
Frank is the coolest. And actually, I'm trying to get him to come do a presentation for you guys. So hopefully we'll see him this year. Okay, so we are in like the season of abundance right now, and I want to inspire you with some more content on creating pollinator gardens, and gardens that are great for not just honeybees, but all of our winged friends. This is a really fun topic, and I hope that you find some good value in it. We already know why pollinators, clearly, but we'll talk about some of the other ones, the mason bees and butterflies and whatever. I'm gonna dabble into permaculture for you, just so that you have another like tool in your toolkit to kind of view the world, and designing by zones, which I'll explain, getting to know some of the local pollinators and plants that you can start researching if they're appropriate for your area. So we know why, I think at this point we know why pollinators, but not just, again, not just the honeybees. And we've had this conversation like with Mick, you know, honeybees becoming sort of like this poster child of pollinators, where yet there are still so many other pollinators that need support and activism and habitat restoration, and so many other ways that we can like show up for the insect world. You know, it's really hard to be a bee guardian and kind of like ignore all of the other ones. You see the world differently as you're experiencing, and all of these winged creatures become just like so dear to your heart. And it's important for us to step into more roles of like activism, you know, within our local governments and local schools. One of my students, actually, she's a mother. She did one of my first bee guardian trainings, and she was really moved by the fact of, you know, how deadly the pesticides are, obviously, to insects, but how also they are used so prolifically in our cities and especially in our schools. And so she created a task force in Orange County in Southern California, and she went to school boards and local city governments and was able to create incredible change to the point where they stopped using pesticides in a lot of schools. And that was like huge for the environment, huge for the insects, huge for the health of our children. All of it is like so deeply connected. When we were in San Clemente, there was a couple years of me going to city council meetings with my students and showing them how to show up at a city council meeting, so that they could learn the process of local government, and also learn how to, you know, read new policies being presented, and also present new ideas to the council. So we had created a revision for the very old and antiquated municipal code that said you couldn't have a beehive there in San Clemente. And this was actually instigated by the fact that I had 7 beehives. I had moved into my husband's house there in San Clemente, and so I had 7 beehives on the hill, and someone called the city on us, and I had to remove them. And so I was pissed, obviously. And as I looked at the code, it was like just so old and antiquated, like hadn't been updated since, I don't know, the late 80s. And they're just operating on this like old jargon. And that actually happens with a lot of things. So, you know, a lot of us here in this class, like have children, are stewarding not just like land and animals, but the next generations. And I'm really like pushing you to find ways that you can step out of just like the daily citizen kind of experience and put yourself out there to really initiate something different. We know how important honeybees are to pollination, but this also, for food, this also is an interesting conversation where we see other bees can be also extremely efficient at pollinating. There's a blue orchard bee, bumblebees, alfalfa bees. All of them are highly specialized for certain plants. And we need to start like going to the conversation of biodiversity, which we talked with Mick a lot, biodiversity in the environment, and not just farms, which is huge, But our gardens, our land, our cities, our gardens at schools, like all of this is opportunity for us to restore the soil and bring biodiversity back in. So that's, yeah, I was just talking about that. When you're stewarding your own land, like you have this opportunity to have a really significant impact on the health of pollinators. And of course, like the local plant, flora, and fauna. I'm sorry, it's actually raining right now, and we just had a heat wave of like over 100 for 3 days. So I'm just taking a moment to say thank you. Stewarding land is like, it's such an amazing gift, and it's also, you know, this amazing responsibility at the same time. Even if it's, I tell folks this a lot, even if you just have a small garden, this could be habitat for a lot of the solitary bees. If you don't have space for a honeybee hive, you can grow milkweed for butterflies. Like there is so much that we can do. And again, the best part of that I'll show you later is a lot of the plants that are great for pollinators are great for humans because they're medicinal and they're great for the soil. So I'll share a little bit more of that with you. So in terms of permaculture, like why I'm bringing this in, permaculture is something that changed my whole worldview 10 years ago when I did my training. And it's how I move forward when I'm talking about the land or stewarding land. It is how I see the landscape. It's almost like you have the ability to pop back and forth between different lenses. And so when we talk about designing pollinator gardens, I'm just going to give you a few tools from the whole permaculture ethos that you can start to play with. Of course, if you do a full training, you'll have like the full immersion of all the principles. But from here, essentially to understand it's a process of how we design things. And it could be how you design a school, how you design a city. And this conversation will be like how you design a space or the land. And with the goal of mimicking patterns and relationships that we find in nature. So restoring the natural world as best as we can. That can be in a building or a garden, etc. And then permaculture calls us to do earth care, people care, and fair share. So those are like the 3 ethics that we're caring for the earth, we're caring for each other, we're sharing the abundance with each other, with the plant and animal world, and we're sharing with collaboration. Okay, so let's experiment with zones to talk about how we're going to build out some pollinator gardens. So pollinator gardens in general, like what we're trying to do is provide resources for foraging and habitat. We want to increase biodiversity. We want to leave undisturbed areas for hibernation of some of the species and to eliminate the use of pesticides and other chemicals whenever possible. This picture is like a glorious meadow, wildflower meadow, that is just beaming with biodiversity and food and resources for so many species. So we can't I've never really encouraged people to just be beekeepers. I've always encouraged people to be earth stewards. And this, journey of caring for bees is, it really goes hand in hand with restoring the earth. So in permaculture, when we're looking to design something, we get to break it up into different zones. And during this conversation, I'm going to use the zoning to kind of guide how we're approaching this garden concept. So zone 0 would be your home, like where you reside. You're there every day. in the winter, you're not really going out that much, but you're there every day, right? Zone 0. Zone 1 is well, it's not something. It's an area around your home that you visit every single day. So in this photo, it's a picture of like a small homestead here. There's the garden, there's the greenhouse, the compost. It looks like there's some beehives further out, but that's probably zone 2. And then you'll see sequentially the different zones have different things in them. In general, like you can, when you're designing the space, you can either do like concentric rings around zone 0, or you can have little bubbles that go into zone 0 and zone 1. It doesn't necessarily have to be this like perfect circle radiating outwards. You get to decide like which spaces you visit the most for zone 1. However, like moving forward, if you were to look at your space and have the opportunity to redesign, this is how you would approach that. You would put things that you need to tend to every day in zone 1. Your garden, your chickens, your greenhouse. Those have to be close to the house. It always amazes me when I see people put their garden beds on the other side of their lawn, like far away from their house. Like you're just creating more work for yourself. So put it close to you, make it easier. And also you're going to tend to those things more efficiently and more quickly once you see it and it's closer to you. Zone 2, we have orchards and animals, possibly something you still might see every day, but doesn't require a ton of effort. Zone 3 is something you probably don't see every day, maybe every other. Zone 4 then becomes more of like a perennial zone, ponds, pasture for us, like in this example. The zone 4 here for me is definitely pasture. I'm over there maybe once or twice a week if we're walking through. My immediate 5 to 7 acres goes from zone 0 to 2. And then zone 5, like for us, would be the forest that surrounds us, something that maybe you go to, I don't know, every couple weeks. If you like to go hike in the forest every day, that could be included in your zone 1. You could do your map differently. So here's just another visual for you to just like regurgitating what I just said. Zone 1 and 0 is like something you're there every day. Zone 2, frequently. 3, occasionally. 4, infrequently. 5 is more like observing and learning. Or like meditative spaces, quiet spaces, spaces that don't need any management from you, but can just be spaces where you're learning from the local ecology. So let's talk about this, the implementation of pollinator-friendly plants through the zones. So in zone 1, you're gonna find that's the right space for annual flowers and plants. Zone 2 is a great space for your perennials. Zone 3 would be prairie, and zone 4, trees. Not to say that you can't put trees in zone 1, for example, you can do that. But some trees are going to be too large possibly for your immediate area around the house, so they would be further out in the space. I'm gonna pause here. Does everyone is this making sense? Cool, thank you. The permaculture principles, I'm not really going to dive into right now. It's 2 weeks worth, but they're here just to show that some of the things that we keep in mind when we're designing a space, we're always observing and interacting. We're trying to, use resources that are renewable, meaning in this case, selecting plants that self-seed maybe, or finding local nurseries that can provide seeds so we're not ordering from big companies far away. We want to find ways that we're not producing waste. Of course, designing from patterns to details, meaning looking at nature to guide us in how we're planting things out. There's others, but we'll skip those for now. So initially, before you dive into putting a bunch of plants out into your space, you want to sit and observe first what is around you. take the time to visit the flowers, visit the plants that are immediately around you and maybe a little bit further away, and see what kind of insects are on those plants. Are there pollinators visiting you? Do you have a lot of butterflies? Are you a highway for monarch butterflies? Do you notice that you have a lot of solitary bees? This is like all going to guide you to make the best decisions for your space. When we came to Missouri for the first time to look at homes, I found this farm stand, and she had like 2 acres just of prairie flowers mixed with zinnias and cosmos. And it was like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I'm actively I'm actively going to create that here. I'm mapping out spaces where we're going to implement more prairie growth for flowers, and also lots of like native milkweeds and such. I think I may have shown you these before, but these are some of the other, bees that are out there that really need a lot of resources and need us to help restore some of those. These solitary bees are sometimes really tiny, sometimes a little bit bigger, sometimes they're the size of a bumblebee, but they all require nectar and pollen, and diverse sources of nectar and pollen, just like the honeybees. And then we also have butterflies and hummingbirds, and then the bumblebees, of course. So all of these are just so important to the overall ecosystem. And something that I'll remind you guys is the health of the insect world in a specific space is an indicator of the health of the overall environment. I have loads of insects here. I maybe have seen between 10 and 15 different pollinators. In terms of like the bees, I definitely have maybe less than 10 different butterflies that I've seen. There's only a few different hummingbirds that I've seen. So that to me shows that we still need work. Like when I look out into our land, it's mostly oak, and there's so much space and opportunity to really bring in more biodiversity. So now I'm going to go through the different zones with you and share plants that are stellar for those zones. And these I created is more specific to my area in the Midwest. A lot of them, however, are transferable to a lot of different regions. You can easily look up like native plant nurseries in your area usually have plant lists available as resources where you can find plants that are specific to your area that are native. And then a lot of the ones that I'm also giving are some of those like everywhere plants, like sunflower, alyssum, as you'll see, that can be grown in many different locations. So let's go through 0, 1, and 2. These are like kind of like our everyday spaces. Annuals and perennials. So this is where you can focus on your cut flowers, medicinal herbs, and vegetables. Yes, vegetables support pollinators too. Some that are listed: alyssum, bachelor button, also known as cornflower, cosmos, flowering tobacco, lantana, marigold, spider flower, sunflowers, and zinnias. This is not comprehensive, obviously, but you'll get the idea that the cut flowers, the medicinal herbs, the vegetables require your attention daily or every other day. Meaning, if you need to water by hand, or hopefully you have the opportunity to set up a drip irrigation. But the cut flowers are typically plants that you need to visit every day so that you can prune appropriately, deadhead, harvest the flowers as needed. Your medicinal herbs are more perennial, so you can let them kind of grow in on their own. And then of course your vegetables you need to see every day. So these are the types of plants that you can support pollinators, put in your zone 0 through 2. There's also an opportunity for you to really play with the concept of layering, using all the different types of space that you have available. Climbing, vertical, installing like hoops in your garden, installing trellises, things like passion fruit, climbing rows. What's another one that I'm thinking of? There's, why can't I think of that one now? The name just escaped me. At any rate, the concept of using vertical space and layering comes into play here as well. Really like maximizing how much biodiversity you can put in space. Here's some other tips, like when you're planning your space out or putting plants in. You can layer with dwarf trees, shrubs, herbaceous plants, and creeping plants. So you have the opportunity to, around your house, if you don't really want like huge, massive trees like a eucalyptus, you can look at dwarf trees that are fruiting, that provide amazing flowers in their season for the pollinators, and then fruit for you. Under your dwarf tree, you have another layer lower that would be like the shrubs. Those could be hawthorn or elderberry. Some of the larger salvias, creosote, you know, there's just like obviously hundreds and hundreds. So then you have your dwarf, you have like your next shrubbery kind of plant. Then in front of that or in between, you can do an herbaceous. That's also like something like a hibiscus that kind of like bushes out, but is not necessarily like a huge shrub. Then you can also include some of your medicinal plants like lemon balm and mint, lavender. So those are, you know, still get fairly large, but not necessarily a huge shrub. And then your creeping plants underneath all of those, creeping thyme. And then even if you want to incorporate the vining ones, honeysuckle, passion fruit, etc. So just within like a space along your fence, you can do all of these plants, even if you only have maybe 6 feet from a fence. That is a lot of space. Something that pollinators really love is when we plant in blocks and by color. So when we often look out into like a meadow of flowers, we're seeing like this assortment of color and flower type. But when bees are out foraging, they actually want to forage on one particular type of pollen or nectar at a time. So you can make it a little bit easier for them by planting in blocks, like a block of lavender, a block of elderberry, a block of sunflowers. Can be a lot easier for them to go and efficiently collect the resources and go back to the hive and come to the same place. And then also, like, again, including varying height and sizes gives so much more visual interest for your garden. Then, of course, the big task is planning for blooms and nectar year round. This is something I'm still working on here. Yes, there's an abundance of like flowers right now, but what about in the fall, and what about early spring? So for me here, as an example, early spring, some of the first flowers to come out are dogwood, and that has like a really big, beautiful white flower, has a little bit of nectar, has pollen. And so something we're going to work on is incorporating more dogwood. And then what about the late autumn ones? Well, goldenrod is fairly late here when it starts blooming, like in September. So that's a really nice end of summer resource. But how far can we extend that? Is there anything that goes into October maybe, so that we're supporting them as much as we can throughout the year? And of course, in Southern California, there's a lot more flexibility. But for us that have actual like cold winters, we have to be more creative. The native plants are the ones that you should be installing first. because that way we're restoring the soil, we're restoring the native habitat, and also like inviting in the native insect world. Things like native milkweed. For us, we have 2 native milkweeds here, which are incredible. They grow prolifically, and the butterflies are all over them. And then obviously, then you can bring in, if you want to support the monarch butterflies on their migration, that's a specific milkweed as well. You know, as you have all these friends asking you about bees, like how can I support bees? They can get rid of their lawns and create like little micro prairies. There's also lots of more eco-friendly grasses that are like less toxic and also less water intensive. So, you know, the conversation around pesticides, water usage, these are some of like huge impacts on pollinator health. And if someone asks about, well, how can I support the bees? You can say, well, do you use pesticides? Do you use herbicides? Are you planting, you know, appropriate climate plants? Those are some of the best things that people can do. Water source is really important to have in your zones. Can be zone 2, 3, or 4, or even zone 1. We'll notice though that it's important to have a water source that's more enticing for bees, meaning they actually really like water that gets kind of funky, that has moss on it, because they like to drink the minerals as well and collect the minerals from the moss. That way, if you have like a pool or a natural pool that you and your children are swimming in, the bees are not coming to that one first for drinking. Just like my friend down the road, I helped him install a beehive. His kids have a splash pad, and the kids couldn't use it the other day because the bees were all over it. So I told him, you need to get another water source on your property. In removing invasive species, of course, that is important because it brings in other pests that can be really harmful or detrimental to the native pollinator species. And then be okay with our weeds: dandelion, violet, nettles, purple nettle, henbit. These are also like incredibly medicinal plants. Finally, I will say the no-till zones. If you have a few no-till zones on your property, we don't till here in general, but zones that are undisturbed completely, maybe where you're putting piles of some maybe brush or leaves, because in the fall, the solitary bees will start to make nests in there, and they sleep in the soil over winter. So of course, like our medicinal herbs that we love to use for ourselves and our family are also ones that are incredibly supportive to pollinators as well. And you cannot have enough of these in your space. So this list is here for you to reference. When we talk about perennials, this is like a game changer, because here are plants that will take off. Maybe you need to support them throughout the first year, but year after year, they're going to come back like even better and stronger. Some of the main things with your perennials is like you cut them back in the fall, you know, reducing their height, applying compost throughout that first year, and then applying compost every spring. And that way you're going to have these amazing plants coming back year after year that are supportive to the environment and to the pollinators. Echinacea actually grows native here as a prairie flower, which is like incredible to me. So does Monarda. Right now it's Monarda season. So along my pasture, there's just like chunks and big rows of Monarda. It's really incredible. And goldenrod, like I mentioned, asters, there's a lot of asters here. So many to invest in and get them really supported throughout that first year of growing. This is really fun to look at. This is kind of like a concept that is for a front yard, but just to really emphasize the fact of how much biodiversity you can have in a front garden, like just someone's front yard. That's like 11 feet by 18 feet space. So, I mean, this is like really packed in there with a lot of amazing plants. black-eyed Susans, prairie dock, milkweed, blue stars, irises, coneflowers, indigo, like so many. This one was from Missouri, but again, you can look at your Department of Conservation or native plant nurseries. There's also a lot of nonprofits in California that have these kind of resources. You can look at the Pollinator Action Team and also Xerces Society, XERCES, which I've mentioned before. They have a lot of resources on, how to design up spaces or plant lists or whatever. Okay, so our last couple zones here, 3 through 5. This is more applicable like if you have a greater space that you're stewarding, which some of you in this class do. This is where you can focus on a lot of perennials, a lot of prairie, and a lot of trees. As we learned with Mick, like there's so much that we can do in terms of tree restoration that is so vitally important to the ecosystem, where trees are really kind of like holding a lot of life force and a lot of like cornerstone energy. We forget to have these conversations about the native trees that are appropriate for the space, right? And again, these are usually the ones that are providing early season and late season feedings. And you can start by planting along fences, around ponds, kind of mapping out the spaces that way. And in terms of management, usually those prairie spaces or orchards require some prescribed burning in the spring. Like for us, it increases the fertility of the soil. But then you can also do a lot of things like planting in cover crops also through winter. There's a lot of cover crops that plant through winter that will help like increase the fertility of the soil. And then if you're like a land steward and also planning on farming or opening up a operation that way, each state has their own programs and lots of nonprofits that are supporting farmers and growers with land restoration. For us here in Missouri, it's called EQIP or CRP, CSP, where there's a lot of either money available or resources available, help available to help people put in native plants and also create more, restore more buffers along farmland. So some trees for us here in Missouri is an example that are great for pollinators. We have dogwood, elderberry, hickory, honey locust, maple, pawpaw, pecans, persimmons, plums, sassafras, willow, witch hazel. A lot of these you might have in your area. Cottonwood is another example. So the concepts that I have listed here of like agroforestry, windbreak, hedgerows, this becomes a little bit more in advanced conversation. But if you ever get to a point where you want to start rehabilitating some of these larger spaces on your land, we can help you. So moving forward, like I think I've mentioned this before, make sure you really have your plant list dialed in, that you're building over time, taking note of the plants that are blooming around you and keeping a log so that you can order them again for next year. And just again to revisit like how many pollinators are out there. I think I've showed this to you before, but there are so many that are flies even that are pollinators. So maybe make it a point this summer, now that it's full swing summer abundance, that for you and your children or just you to like start identifying some of these new species and become familiar with the ones that are around you. And we've talked about our native bees and honeybees, the differences there. But again, to note that the native bees don't live in hives or cavities, but they nest in the ground or in old pieces of tree stumps, things like that, logs. So having some of those on your property is also really helpful. And again, some of our common bees, which are so sweet and fuzzy and cute. And then like the butterfly conversation is really important. I mean, everyone is really concerned with the monarchs, and rightly so, like their populations have declined quite drastically, but there are so many other butterflies that are out there and really also important to the longevity of the environment and the ecosystem. So we really have to do our best to think about them. And there's also beetles and the hummingbirds and bats. What does your area lend itself to supporting, you know? We went through the life cycle of the bees. I just want to show you an example again of the bumblebee nest where they live. And this is also a mason bee living in a little mud hole. So something we're going to talk more about next month as a little prelude is the types of pollen and nectar that are out there. So as we start to look at our hives throughout the summer and notice that the different pollens that are coming in, there's a wide range of colors. And this is not even extensive. There's purple, blue, green pollen. And it becomes really fun to try to guess what they are. There are lots of little tables online that you can look it up. But this is important for the bees' diet, as I've talked about before. They really need to have that diversity of the pollen in their diet. So we'll talk again next month about pollen and nectar and honey. I may have mentioned this to you before, but this is also something fun for you guys to play with, is creating habitat for the nesting bees or the bumblebees. And you can do this really easily by creating bee blocks or bumblebee nests. And I'll have this slide, it's posted in the classroom. All you need to do is just look up a YouTube video. They're all fairly simple. It requires just like drilling specific sized holes into logs. And that way you can create like native bee hotels as well. So for us here in Missouri, again, this was like we have our extension and we have a master pollinator steward program that I did, but for everyone, there's also the Xerxes Society, Pollinator Friendly Alliance, the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign. A lot of those have more plant resources available for everybody, for your area. Okay. So I'm gonna stop there for you. So any questions on that? I went fast, but this could be like a 4-hour presentation if I really like, stretched it out.
I have a question. Well, I guess it's more of like a personal awareness or observation. Well, and ties in, I guess, with a bit of a question. But I think like you know, where I'm at, like it's rural, so it's very like we're really blessed that we're not, you know, there's no like herbicides or pesticides being used close to our land. I do know friends that are on the lake who like their neighbors are doing that right in their garden, and so they were really upset about that because it was so close. But I find like our land, like I guess it's more like I'm still like in this like I waver in between, you know, I aspire to have a green thumb. I always have. I feel like I'm really much more comfortable in like the like wild harvesting and wild foraging than like cultivating. But I don't know if I know actually that's definitely where my heart's more drawn to. But I am like trying, like we planted this whole field in the back with wildflowers. So we'll see what happens this year. Like that to me, it's like they're all native, they're all supposed to do well here. We prepared the soil so they had like competitive opportunity. Because I find, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I find like most things I plant, just the nature just takes it over. Like it doesn't, nothing really like has like a standing chance, it feels like, against what's already here. So I don't know if you had like insider advice to that, but I think some of that is that you actually, like, you did mention a few things, like you need to tend to it the first year, you need to compost it. Like I think maybe my sprinkle and let be is maybe not the best strategy, but yeah, I guess just kind of how you contend with some of the very like hardy natural plants that are already here.
Yeah.
I want to introduce more biodiversity, but I think we have a lot too, but I do still like how do you introduce it and then give it a real chance to succeed?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, there is a lot of like management in the first year of for any plant, like restoring it, the space. So for example, we have been just casually throwing wildflower seed and native seed out onto the pasture or on the hillside here right before rain, and not really doing any kind of like preparation. We're just observing like how well that works for us here. Other trees though, like the elderberry trees we've put in, they're not on a drip yet, so we've been watering them and composting them. Like there's just some extra effort you're gonna have to do. When we start to work on this pasture, and adding more of the native grasses and some of like the native plants that can be in a pasture, it's going to require us to use the tractor. We might have to till a little bit and probably add some kind of compost or a cover crop, and then have to manage it a little bit. I would say like maybe start with smaller chunks at a time that are manageable. If you're looking at like a quarter of an acre, that's very overwhelming to manage. So potentially like starting in little clumps around your zone 1 first, and then move to zone 2 and get those established, because you can see those every day. It's, I definitely have these dreams of like rehabilitating that forest, but there's no way I can personally get out there every day right now, just with knowing my schedule with the children. It's just not realistic. So I'm not gonna make that effort right now. So you just have to prioritize and start closer to home first.
Yeah. Okay. And that's what I keep doing, because I feel like every year I overwhelm myself, and then sometimes I just throw my hands up and I walk away, and then the garden just gets completely overtaken by weeds because it was just too big and too much. But this year, like, I'm trying to keep it more small and manageable. I'm using my cold frames as my like medicinal herbal garden and some veggies, and then our dog got in it and dug everything up that I had planted like as soon as I took the covers off. So I was like, oh my gosh, like even when it's like literally like one step out of my door, it's like zone 0 and I'm like, I'm still not succeeding, but I'm not giving up.
Well, I have a relatable story. Like we're farming, right? Like this is our profession, and I have been working on my front garden all year, and I put plants in, I put so many flowers, and there's always a rogue group of 4 chickens that come all the way from the pasture and come all the way to my house and tear up my garden. And I am like so frustrated, and it's to the point now where I cannot put anything in there until I have some appropriate chicken wire up and some different fencing, because I've done it probably 10 times and I'm very frustrated. So yeah,
okay.
that's where the observation comes in. If you're noticing that there's a ton of weed pressure, then you're gonna have to like start your garden smaller, manage a smaller space first. And the weeding is just, it's just something that has to happen, even if you're doing native plants. Often when land restoration is happening, there's also like protective little either cages around them for deer and other small animals. There's also, you can do like fabric or landscape plastic to ensure that there's like not a lot of pressure going in on the plant. It's a lot of work. That's why people don't do it. So, but it's worth it, obviously. Like we have to do the work.
Yeah, it's inspiring to hear you talk about it too, because I keep like wish-washing between being like, this isn't like, you know, that feeling of like, just like, it's so funny because it's with when you introduce your kids to something new and they're not good at it right away. And you're like, no, you're never good at anything right away. Like it takes time. And so when I kind of laugh at myself because I keep being like, I don't have a forte for this, but it's not so much that it is more about intention and then almost like commitment and perseverance and not getting intimidated and insecure and like doing this and being like next year, like it'll be different. Like, yeah. So I think that's a big piece. And I have like a like you keep using language that makes it really approachable to like stewarding and things, because I have such this like almost this like repulsion. Now it's become stronger and stronger because my body, I feel like I'm trusting more and more and more as the compass. And it's like my body has this almost like instantaneous repulsion to like anything domestication in general. So like down to like, you know, like it sounds so weird, like, but like even like pets, you know, like I was like, but I know there's like hundreds of years. And when I learned that dogs actually may have domesticated themselves because of like the like mutualistic beneficial relationship, I was like, okay, I feel actually a little bit better about the fact that we've reintroduced a dog into our family, which of course for like 900 other reasons is an amazing thing. But there's these little pieces where like, I feel like any form of because I even feel like as humans we've been like massively domesticated and we've moved quite a bit off. Like I learned, this is kind of in a weird aside, and I'm not like a born religious like background, but someone explained this, my husband's sister-in-law explained this, like the word sin actually means like missing the mark. And it shifted everything for you when I understood that. Like it shifted this whole concept of like why like Yeshua even said like we're all sinners. Like it's impossible not to sin, because even in a day you can be like, I'm gonna make the best lunch for my kids or whatever, and then you just slightly miss whatever the mark. And so I find that like with our domestication, but there's a very different relationship when you're like when you're stewarding, or like you said, like when you're creating restoration, you're creating a safe space for something to even establish itself. You think about that as like even how we do that for our children. It's like, oh, okay, that's different than manipulating it. There's a difference. So thank you again.
Yeah, well, and like the opposite of domestication is like rewilding, right? And one of the quickest ways you can rewild yourself is work with the plant world and work with the soil. Like that is a direct rewilding because it activates memories from thousands and thousands of years that is within you. And everyone has the ability to steward the land and grow things and grow food and grow plants. It's just remembering like how to get there. And you know, the landscape is far different than it was a lot, you know, of our ancestors. So yeah, we have other things to deal with. And also the environment is not in balance until we try to support it to reach balance, right? And so that's why we have weeds, quote unquote, and pest pressure, because there's not a balance. So rewild yourself and get your hands in the soil. That's the conclusion for my presentation today. I'm sorry, I was like, had to snack on a little cracker here. Any questions before we close for today? Comments? Okay. I will have a few things for you to bring to next class, and I'll post it on the classroom. Start working on your project, or start dreaming and brainstorming it. And Yeah, our next class is August 5th, where we meet about honey. So, yeah. Yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I do have a question. I just
Yeah.
needed to think for a second. So, because I just feel like the conversation's been so rich today. And I feel like this is something that's like been threading through for me for like 2 decades, probably. Even since like my university days. So sorry, I've got one really loud show going on out there. I'm gonna close that door. But like, because you just said something really interesting about like why there's the pressure of weeds and that there's not a balance. And I was thinking about how I watched like the largest littlest farm or whatever, that documentary, and how there's this beautiful equilibrium that came about once everything kind of reestablished itself, and then there was a balance, right? And you had top predators and the lowest. But then even in that kind of scenario, if you're involved in that, you're still in relation. It's not like, because so I guess like to simplify it, it's like I have this very strong like belief that we're still in the garden, like that everything we need is actually provided for us, like if nature was left to its own devices, in the amounts that we needed in relation to like where we are on the planet, so on and so forth. So this concept of like this basically like hunting gathering versus farming, right? Like but I also believe that like it's like there is a relationship, just like how the flower responds when the bee comes to it, that like our physical presence and our touching the earth and our relationship to the plants is actually mutualistically beneficial. Like we were created and birthed from the earth. Like I don't see us as like, I think what's happened on mass has been like an alter like a of off course, missing the mark, like we veered off. But I don't think by nature we're at odds, that we are actually mutualistically like symbiotic when we're in alignment. So that's where I think it's like this, like when you say like weeds are kind of, because we're out of balance, right? So we see more weeds. Like I always found it really striking when they talked about how land that had been like over farmed, it's like the weeds come back in a certain order to restore the balance. So I guess what you're saying then is not so much like weeds are there, like, because I think about how like when you're in a garden and it's like eliminate this, this, and the concept of a weed is actually just our perception of, it's like not where I want you to grow. Right, period. Because usually the weed is medicine in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this intricate dance, I guess, and I'm still like learning. And I think what you said there, maybe there is a lot of guidance that comes from just observation and getting your hands literally in the ground and recognizing like that you can, it's almost like having a relationship. Like sometimes weeds are more aggressive because they're trying to create balance, but you can also convince them that, in this space, like this is, you're there and I'm here. Kind of like that really cool place in Finhorn, is it called, or something, in Scotland, where they actually like energetically talk to the rodents and the animals and the things. Like it was sort of this phenomenon that was like where they tried to establish boundaries based on like energetic communication with these pests and everything. I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Kind of like,
yes, absolutely. Again, there's like a few ways to approach this. This is like the crux of farming. I mean, when you're farming, you're like focused on production and you're supposed to be meeting like goals. And if you're casually gardening and like, growing for your family, the pressure is less, right? To have like this organized, neat space. In general, like the weeds are just like plants, as you said, like either we don't want them there because they're in the way, or they're trying to show us something. And usually that has to do with like a mineral deficiency in the soil, or a certain pest that needs to be balanced out. So this is like more of a conversation that I've been learning about in my biodynamic training, where like obviously every plant has a spirit and a presence, and collectively there's like communication happening between all all beings, where, for example, like there's certain plants that are host plants for certain insects, and if the environment was balanced enough, there would be enough predators to handle that pest or the collection of that particular insect. But maybe because the birds have been decimated in that space, this pest becomes a pest, this insect becomes a pest. So there's constantly this like ebb and flow. If I look out into my landscape, there are hundreds of varieties of plants, and a lot of them we would consider a weed, but it's fine there. I don't call it a weed. It's just part of the landscape. It becomes more of a challenge when it's just trying to grow in the middle of the, the crops or your garden. But as we noticed now we're here 3 years, every year there's a different plant or weed that is more prominent. And that has to do with the cycle of the soil, the cycles of the seasons here, and also us actively restoring the soil that we're growing in. You will, as you said, you will see the succession of regeneration happening, just like the same thing with the insects. We've had each year a different wave of a different insect that has shown itself to be a pest. So in general, like the concept of like balance in the ecosystem or a farm or a garden is when the presence of certain plants or insects or whatever is not impacting anything else. Like everything can be harmonious. In organic gardening, there's always pests and there's always insects on everything. It just becomes a problem at a certain point, right? When there's no check for that particular insect, for example. So anyway, yes, it's hard. It's hard to walk that line as like an organic farmer and someone who's actively trying to restore the space and extract for production at the same time. So
I mean, it makes so much sense. I mean, I spend historically, like, and it's embarrassing it sounds, I feel like I put like hundreds of dollars into this like idea of growing food. And then like we celebrate like our 2 dinners that we have enough food from the garden to eat. And it's like, wow, it really wasn't cheaper than groceries, but maybe one day it will be. Like, but I feel like I forage all year round. Now that doesn't really feed the family, but it's nutrients, like it's sprinkled on our food or it's added to or whatever. Like, but yeah, but I find that you really did like make it. And I feel like I've been very drawn towards like the permaculture and the biodynamic gardening, and like in some ways like I wish, just like I feel like I'd like to offer people like for like a small amount of money to go to their land and tell them what's medicine and what's edible and what's on their own land. Like I'd love to bring like you here or your partner and say, you like, I've been looking at my land for a year with through my lens of what I think this and this, but someone that has like 10, 15, whatever years experience being like, okay, this is this would be your ideal plan for the next 5 years, and leave you with it. Like I'd spend money on that to have someone with those lens to come and see. And that's probably what some people do. It's a profession, I'm sure, maybe, but it just seems like it's something that would be an incredible niche to have.
We do that. Lucian and I do that. He's done that a lot longer than I have, but yeah, we designed for people's spaces. So yeah, it's a thing.
That's cool. Yeah. Wow. Maybe I'll have to fly you guys out here sometime.
Oh, there's a lot to talk about traveling in this meeting today and I'm getting like very excited. Yay. Yeah, thank you. This is amazing. Thank you for the conversations and the inquiries. And please feel free to reach out this month if you need anything. Check in. I'd love to hear from you. And if not, I will see you in August.
Yeah, August. That's right. Yeah, have a great month, you guys.
Cheers. Enjoy. Bye.
Marlene's okay, Marlene's off. Bye.